So today I want to tell you a story, a true story. It's the roots of my testimony. My name's Tom. You're watching the Watchman River channel. Get comfortable, grab a coffee, a tea, kiwi juice, just grab something. Kick your feet back. And if you're in the mood for a good story, sit down and relax and we'll chat. Okay? This story is the story of my parents. And it's the reason I'm sitting here right now. It's the roots of my testimony. I wouldn't be here sitting by this river talking Jesus every day with you if it weren't for my parents. This is a good story. My dad, his name was Bert. He was born in 1933 in Grand Falls, New Brunswick, Canada. He was a great man of integrity, a hardworking man, very hardworking man. When he was a boy, he had 9 siblings. He was number 2 of 10 kids. He had 9 siblings. At 13 years old, he had already dropped out of school. He went to 7th grade. And after 7th grade, he looked around and he thought, I'm meaningless in this house. All I am is another mouth to feed, because they were poor. They were very poor. So he said, I'm leaving home. I'm going to go work and send the money back to my parents. Now, my dad was a naughty kid. He was kind of, I don't want to say the black sheep of the family, but there wasn't a lot of love in those early years in the family for my dad. He was naughty. He was always getting in trouble. 13 years old, he said, I'm leaving home. I don't even know if he told his parents. I don't think he did. I think he just left. He didn't want to be just another mouth to feed. So he goes and he lives with an uncle. Guess what the uncle did for a living? He owned a brothel. So my 13-year-old dad moves in with his uncle in the brothel. And my dad was a very good-looking young kid. All the girls loved to, they weren't doing anything with him, but they loved to flirt with him and tease him, and he loved girls. But he said nothing ever happened, but he lived in the brothel for a while he worked. And he'd send the money back to his parents. I don't know how much his parents appreciated it. They didn't seem like they appreciated it that much from the way he told the story, but I don't know. But that's what he did at 13. Talk about a different time period than now, This was just after World War II. So let's fast forward a little bit. He's 16 years old now. Now he is going out into the woods with my grandmother to live all the nice months of the year up in Canada. And my grandfather's a lumberjack at this time. So my dad goes out into the woods at 16 years old with his mom, and their job out there is to feed 75 lumberjacks 3 meals a day, to cook and feed and clean for these 75 lumberjacks. That's the way it was back then. Those lumberjacks would head out into the middle of the woods all the nice months of the year. They'd be gone 6 months of the year. And they'd live there. And they would just keep cutting trees and cutting trees. Well, my dad would peel potatoes once or twice a day. Potatoes, there were so many of them up there. Potatoes were like the cheapest, dirt cheap food for them up in Maine, Canada. My dad peeled potatoes and helped my grandma cook. And many times those lumberjacks who worked from sun up to sundown, they would come in and they'd be eating, and they would say to my grandmother, that's the hardest working boy I've ever seen in my life. That was my dad. Hard working guy. Hard working guy. Till the day he died, my dad was a hard working man. But those lumberjacks would continually say, kid's the hardest working kid. Now let's fast forward a couple of years. 18 years old. My dad's 18 now. My dad and my grandpa decide they've had enough of Canada. There's no work and they're poor. They're like, let's go to the United States. They wind up in Hartford, Connecticut. My grandfather's a carpenter. My dad's going to go help him build stuff. So they end up in Connecticut. And when they get to Connecticut, my grandpa's out with my dad, and he goes to a friend's house. And he says to my dad before he gets to the friend's house, look, they have a daughter. I don't want you looking at her, thinking about her. She's high class. You just be respectful. Come with me. So they go to the house, and my dad lays eyes on this girl, and he's going gaga over her. And my grandfather leans over and says, don't even think about it. And he said, Dad, I'm going to marry that girl. He said it before he had talked to her. I'm going to marry that girl. Well, that's my mom. And her name was Carmel. Carm for short, C-A-R-M. So this is the story of Bert and Carm. A year and a half later, I think my dad was 19 and change, or maybe 20 and change, and my mom was 19 and change. They got married. I don't know if my dad married her because my grandfather said, she's too high class for you. And he was like, it was a challenge. But they stayed married till they both died. So it ended up being a pretty good arrangement. So my parents now, they're married. And they have 4 sons. Now, I'm the third of 4. And you got to hear our 4 names. Tim, Ted, Tom, and Terry. The 4 T's. Whenever I would introduce my brothers and I'd say, this is Tim, this is Ted, this is Terry, they would always say, you guys are all T's? And this is the line I always said. I've been saying it for 55 years. It was the 60s. That's what I always say. It was the 1960s. My parents were a little bit, So they have 4 sons. And we're raised Catholic. We're Catholic. My parents believe in Jesus, but they don't have a personal relationship with Jesus. But they believe in him. Catholic Church, they believe in the Father, Son, Holy Ghost. But there's no relationship there. They go to church on Sunday. They drag us there. I despised it. Hated every minute of it. Didn't understand it. To me, it was just nonsense. But we went. And the best part was my dad would get us like a treat after church. That was the best part about church. So, my dad is working for a furniture store. Very hard worker, like I said. And he's becoming really good friends with the owner of the furniture store. And at some point, now there's a lot of details with what I'm about to tell you that I don't fully understand, and I never will. My dad didn't talk about it that much in the details. So I don't know the details. But at one point, my dad had poured a lot of work into this furniture store with being very good friends with the owner. My mom didn't like the owner of the store. My mom said, Bert, I don't like this guy. I don't trust him. I don't like him. My dad was, according to my mom, my dad was a very bad judge of character. He would just find this guy. This guy's a great guy. And my mom would go, no, he's not. And she was always right. She didn't trust this guy. Well, my dad and this guy got close, working together all day. And one day the guy said to my dad, the furniture store wasn't doing that great at this point. You want to buy the store from me? My dad's like, how much you want? It's like 25 grand. Now, I don't know the other details. I can't tell you the details. All I know is the basic. I don't know about like the inventory. But he wanted $25,000. Now, this is back in 1971, 72, somewhere around there. My dad said, okay, I'll buy it. They didn't have a lawyer draw up papers. I don't understand it. I can't explain it to you. It's insane. It was a handshake deal. My dad was a man of integrity. So when my dad shook his hand, my dad thought, I don't care what goes on, this guy's going to get paid. This guy was very questionable character. But I don't know how they pulled that off. I don't know how, I don't understand how the business licenses were transferred. I don't know any of that. All I know is they had a verbal agreement, 25 grand, the store was my dad's. So my dad took over the store. My dad decided to run it much different than the owner had previously. My dad thought, I'm going to really do it up. So he cleaned the place up. He got it beautiful. My dad was the type, like, there was no dust behind. It was a furniture appliance store. A lot of furniture, some appliances. Cleaned up everything, got it beautiful. My dad decided for his grand opening of the under new ownership, he hired Hawaiian girls to dance. So they had the leis and their whole thing, and they're doing their dances. Tons of people showed up. Tons of people. All of a sudden, the store starts taking off. Because my dad had this he kind of had an entrepreneurial spirit. It was innate. It was in him. He took all the profits that he was making from the store and kept pouring it into the store, making it better and better. I can't tell you, I was a little kid. I'm 7 or 8 years old at this time. I can't tell you how long he owned the store. Maybe a year. I don't even know if it was quite a year or a little over a year, but it wasn't a long time. He used to buy toys, really high quality, good toys, not junk toys. And he had a glass showcase behind the register, and he put the toys of this furniture appliance store. He put the toys in this glass showcase. And when a family would buy something from a store, like they'd come in and buy a living room set, they'd get up to the register to pay, and then their kids would just like stare in awe at these toys behind the counter, just like, look at that. My dad would go, which one do you want? And the kids, the parents would be like, what? Because they were really nice. Back then they had these heavy metal trucks and Tonka trucks and just really nice quality toys. And my dad would give each kid in that family a toy just to take home for free. Well, the loyalty, people were leaving that store. It was the talk of the town. Everyone loved Bert at this store. Everyone knew him. Well, one day, the guy who sold him the store walked in because he knew how successful the store had gotten. And he said, Bert, I want my money. I want it by Monday morning. And if you don't give me the full amount by Monday morning, I'll call the authorities on you. My dad, he didn't have the money. He had been pouring the profits. He was taking a salary so he could feed his 4 kids and his wife and himself. But all the other money he was pouring into the store. He had no savings. And he said, what do you mean? And the guy said, I want the money by Monday. My dad couldn't do it. And the guy came in Monday with a sheriff. And my parents had to declare bankruptcy. It was declaring bankruptcy now can be a traumatic thing. But there's been zillions of them. Back then, in the very early 70s, you were mud. You were mud for 7 years. You were complete mud. Your names were dragged through the dirt. You were dragged through the dirt. So my parents had to declare bankruptcy. They got a lawyer, sat at a desk with him. He charged them very little because he knew my dad. He loved my dad so much. He didn't charge them a lot. And he said, all right, this is what we're going to do. He said, I want you. Do you have any credit cards? Now, this time period, people didn't have a ton of credit cards back in the early 70s. My mom said, I have a Sears credit card, and we have a MasterCard. I think it was called Master Charge back in the early 70s. We have one of those. And he said, all right, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take that Sears card and go to Sears, and I want you to buy your 4 sons clothing for the next 5 years. So think about the sizes they're going to be. And I want you to max out that card and buy their clothes for 5 years, because you're not going to be able to get any charge cards. You're going to have a hard time finding work. You're going to have a hard time living. I want you to go max that card out and buy clothes for those 4 boys. And my parents were like, well, how do we pay that back? And he's like, no. In the bankruptcy, it'll get wiped out. You won't owe Sears that. Don't worry. You just need to do this for survival. And my parents said, okay. And when they left the office, they looked at each other, and my mom said, I can't do that to Sears. And my dad agreed. So they didn't do it. They didn't do it. So now the bankruptcy goes through. Their name is Mud. And the following fall, autumn, right before school, my mom had to buy us clothes for school. So she took her Sears charge card, we all went, this was a yearly thing. We all went to Sears every August and bought clothes for the following school year. She walks in, we get all the clothes, she puts them on the counter, and the card is declined because they shut her card off because they knew she had gone bankrupt. My mom was devastated. My mom had a lot of anxiety about money and bills, and going through a bankruptcy, she almost went to asylums a couple times. She came this close to nervous breakdowns a few times in the years of the bankruptcy. So she got home. We couldn't buy the clothes. She got home and she wrote a letter. My mom was an incredible letter writer. This is before email, before computer. She wrote a letter to the head district manager of the Northeast of Sears. And she explained the story. She explained how they went bankrupt, and how the lawyer said to charge all the clothes for all of us, and how she wouldn't do that. Well, the way she worded the letter, he called her, and the first thing he said to her is, "Carm, I've never read a letter like that. You're incredible at writing letters." He said, "I want you to know something. You will have a credit card at our store till the day you die. It will never get canceled." And he raised her limit, and she got her card back because of the honesty and because of her letter. So we went back to Sears, and sorry to say, I had to wear Sears clothes till I was in mid high school, till I could get a job and get out of them, because they weren't the most fashionable clothes. They were not the most fashionable clothes. So during the bankruptcy, I told you my mom would have this really bad anxiety, really, really harsh. Every time the funny thing is, I was an 7 to 9, like when it started, year-old kid. And I didn't really realize till later in life how hard it was for them to go through this, because they didn't tell us all the time. There was little things. And the thing I'm about to tell you is probably my biggest memory about the bankruptcy. Is every time we pulled up the driveway, my mom would always say, "Oh, please, God, please have the furniture still be in the house." Because back then they could just come to your house and take your stuff when you declared bankruptcy. So every time we went toward the back of the house with the car where she parked, she'd always look and go, "Oh, there's nobody here." She always imagined a sheriff there, or somebody to just reclaim furniture, and we had nothing. Our furniture was torn. In hindsight, her anxiety was real, but I'm like, we had nothing of value in that house that anyone wanted, except a lot of love. So she would always continually have panic attacks going up the driveway. And I remember that very, very clearly. And that's kind of my main memory. And I remember I would just think, because, there was 3 other kids in the car with me, and I was the quiet one out of my 4 brothers. I was quiet, so I did a lot of thinking. The other brothers did a lot of talking. But I remember one of my brothers would say, "Well, why would they take our stuff?" And she goes, "Because of the bankruptcy. We didn't really understand that. I knew the word was bad. I knew we were going through it. But we were eating and wearing our ugly Sears clothes." So all right, so here we go. They're in the middle of this bankruptcy. My mom is on the verge of a nervous breakdown. My dad's working now for a different appliance company, selling appliances all day long, 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week. And then he would, for extra money, he would install like air conditioners in the spring. So he'd leave work at 9, and he'd make appointments with people, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, he'd be putting in air conditioners. My mom's laying in bed one night. He's not home, and she's got the TV on. And Hartford, Connecticut had this is back in the days when you had 4 or 5 channels at the most, but there was a Christian channel. It showed like the PTL Club, it was called, and it showed some local preachers, and well, she would watch his channel occasionally, and she had just started turning it on. And one night, the first night she turned it on, there was a local pastor. I still remember his name. I Googled him once, couldn't find one thing about him. His name was John Bankowski. I'll always remember his name. The guy has no idea how many lives that he affected. I'm sure he was on TV locally, so I'm sure he affected a lot of lives. But in my circle of life, in my family, the guy will never understand. And I'm sure he's long gone. He's got to be long gone. He was older than my parents, and they're long gone. He said she was laying, and she was very nervous, a lot of anxiety. And he said, how would you like to sleep in the arms of Jesus tonight? How would you like to rest in the arms of Jesus? And my mom said she felt this immediate, like, and she thought, I would love to sleep in the arms of Jesus tonight. And she went to sleep that moment. She just went to sleep. She had a very peaceful sleep. The next night, she couldn't wait to turn this guy on again. And within a few nights, he walked her through a sinner's prayer, and she became a Christian. She started having a personal relationship with Jesus, a true relationship with Jesus. She told me the night she asked Christ into her heart, is how she would say it, and she put her faith and trust in Jesus. She said, Tom, I laid back and I felt a peace that I've never felt in my life. And she goes, I felt a literal hand on the top of my chest. I felt a literal hand. There was nobody in the bedroom. She goes, and I felt the comfort of a hand touching me. Like, don't worry. She said it was the hand of Jesus, and it gave her comfort. And suddenly, the whole bankruptcy thing was different. All their troubles, all my mother's troubles in regards to this were different. Jesus gave her joy and peace. Well, my dad, and they kept going. So my mom gave her life to the Lord, and they kept going to the Catholic Church. My dad saw the changes in my mom, and he was jealous. I'm sure some of you guys understand that. He was always number one to my mom, and all of a sudden, she said it to him. He said something to her, and she said, Bert, you have to understand something. You're no longer number one in my life, which hurt him. He didn't realize she'd be a much better wife than she ever was. When you have Jesus, you're a much better spouse. And after a little bit of time, he came to the Lord, and he believed and trusted in Jesus' finished work. And their lives were drastically different. Drastically different. I remember from the moment my mom trusted in Jesus, I remember waking up every morning and it was a different atmosphere. I'd walk out into the dining room and she'd always sit there with her Bible open and her coffee. She'd get up before us, but I remember 7 days, 365 days a year, I would come around the corner and I'd see her head in the Bible with her coffee, and she'd spend time with the Lord. I saw the changes immediately. My dad was a very rough kind of blow top kind of guy, and he settled down a lot. There was a peace to him. There was a change. There was a change. My mom then reconnected with an old high school friend. She hadn't seen this friend in 20 years. Didn't know where she was. Well, one day the phone rang, and it was Ann, which was my mom's best friend in middle school and high school. And Ann talked to my mom, and they found out they were both believers. And back then, phone calls were expensive. Toll calls were expensive. You couldn't just call somebody in another state. If you did, you talk for 1 minute and hang up quick, because it could cost you a lot of money. You were charged by the minute for phone calls. My mom found out she was a believer, so they rekindled that friendship they had, and they started writing letters to each other in the mail. And the reason I say it is I remember the letters were coming once every couple weeks. There was a letter coming from Ann to my mom. And I'd go down the driveway to grab the mail, and I'd look on the back of the envelope, and it always said this word that I didn't understand what it was. And the word was Maranatha. And I just always remember that was where I learned that word. I would say to my mom, "What's Maranatha?" And she said, "Jesus is coming soon." It's beautiful. It was beautiful. So my mom got closer and closer and closer to the Lord. And we were now working toward the tail end of the bankruptcy. We were still poor. I mean, we were poor. Not like we weren't hungry. We always had clothes. We always had food. But in the eyes of the world, we were poor. So I got to tell you, this is a funny rabbit trail story. My mom always had junky cars. You know, back then in the 70s, cars rusted. You don't see many rusty cars anymore, but back then, they all rusted. My mom had this broken down, completely junky station wagon. It was total garbage. It was one of those wood panel station wagons. Well, anywhere there wasn't wood, there was rust. All right? And my mom had 100 Jesus stickers on the back of this rusted station wagon. You're getting the visual, right? She had 100 Jesus is coming back. It's time to seek the Lord. You know, go to church on Sunday, all these Jesus stickers. Well, one day, I'm in like 5th grade, and I'm in front of the school, and I swear the whole school's out there on the sidewalk. I don't know why. I don't remember why. I just remember the embarrassment. My brother's there too. One of my brothers is there too. And we're there, and we're all lined up, a lot of kids. And I don't know why. I don't know if it was a fire drill. I don't know why we were outside. But my mom was picking us up that day a little early for some reason. So it felt like the entire school was out there. Maybe it was just a few classes. But we're lining the sidewalk. And my mom's car starts coming around the corner into the parking lot, right in front of all these kids passing us by. And my brother and I are like, oh my. Because not only was the car a rust bucket with 100 Jesus stickers on the back, but it also didn't have a muffler. So it was very, very, very loud. And my mom's smiling, and she pulls in. She kind of pulls at the end, and every head is collectively going like this. As the car's passing. And I'm thinking, maybe they don't know it's my mother. They don't know it's my mother. And my mom gets out of the car. "Hi, honey." To me and my brother. "Hey, you guys ready to go?" And I just remember walking to the car thinking, like, my life is over. I didn't have many friends anyway, so my life wasn't over. Nothing was affected. And the great thing is my brother was the biggest bully in the school. So nobody really gave us too much grief for that. But he also said he was embarrassed. But he was the bully of the school. Nobody's going to pick on him. I thought you guys would like that rabbit trail. And I just want to say that at one point, I was about 10 years old. Maybe 9, maybe even 8. I don't remember. But my mom, when I saw the changes in my parents, my mom was talking to me about Jesus, and she said, you have to believe that Jesus died for your sins. You have to believe that you're a sinner. She said, "Do you think you're a sinner?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, he died for your sins." And I'm like, wow. And she said, "Do you want to ask him to be your Lord and Savior now?" And I remember thinking, like, I don't really know what that means, but my parents are different, so this is a good thing. And I said, yes. So I repeated a prayer after her. And when I was done, in hindsight, I really believe I was saved that moment. I really do. I believed in the Lord. But I didn't know what I had just done, really. It wasn't that clear to me. But I knew my parents were different, and I knew that I wanted that too. That's the roots of my testimony. To their dying day, my parents praised God for that bankruptcy. To their dying day. What Satan meant to destroy my mother with, to send her to an asylum, he meant harm on them. God had a plan in it. God turned it into a good thing. Can you imagine? They praised God for that bankruptcy the rest of their lives. They found Jesus in the darkest times. So many lives have been affected. My dad, many of his siblings came to the Lord and their families. So many lives were affected. I'm here at this river because of the roots of my testimony, my parents, and what they went through. And now more lives are being changed. That's how God works. So I just want to say, any storm you're going through right now may be the foundation of a beautiful story that can change many people's lives. We all need Jesus. He's the only way to heaven. He's the only one who will forgive sins. He lived a perfect life. He died on the cross. He shed beautiful blood that washes us white as snow. And he's coming back. They put him in a tomb. He rose again. We just have to believe. We have to understand we're sinners and trust in everything he did. Once we believe it in our heart, we're saved. Everything he did saves us. It's beautiful. If you don't know Jesus, turn to him today. We're in the end days. We're in the end days. But if you're going through a storm right now, remember, it might be a foundation. It's maybe very hard right now. You cling to Jesus and know that you're going to get a good story out of it one day. He takes our storms and he turns them into clear skies. We don't see it when we're going through the storm, but he's with us every step of the way. I love you guys.